Jake Martin, a lawyer and public defender in Boston, counted himself lucky to finish the case in time to join his wife, Jill, at the law school's annual reunion outside Miami. He arrived just in time to see Jill being provocative with Juan Mendoza, one of the two rich twin brothers Jake couldn't stand. Instead of interfering with his wife's indecent behavior, he decided to observe and photograph what was happening. He saw her spending the day with Juan, his brother Hector, Sally, and her companion Bill Allen. After the barbecue and around the fire, Jill, Juan, Hector, and his wife Maria participated in an erotic dance in which Jill took off her blue sarong and danced lewdly with Juan. The sarong flew to where Jake was standing. He picked it up and hid it under his shirt. Late that evening, Jill, Juan, Maria, Hector, Sally, and Tom were in the jacuzzi on the resort's beach terrace. The women were topless, and the men kissed and fondled their breasts. Closer to midnight, Jill allowed Juan to accompany her to the bungalow. Jake, watching from a nearby hiding place, saw Jill give Juan her hand and invite him into her room. Heartbroken, Jake decided to return to Boston early in the morning. When Jill returned home on Sunday evening, Jake could barely contain his anger. He asked her leading questions about her activities. Jill didn't admit anything. She didn't connect her actions in Miami to Jake's hostility, even after he said he was moving into the guest room. Jake asked Jill about the whereabouts of her wedding rings. Jill said she left them with Sally for safekeeping. In fact, she filmed them on Juan and Hector's 70-foot luxury motor yacht, Temptress. Jake found them after the yacht had docked and the partygoers had left. At that moment, he took off his wedding ring and hung it on a leather cord around his neck. He told Jill that he would put his ring back on when she put her rings on. That evening, Jake overheard Jill talking on the phone to her best friend Sally. He heard the phrase, "Yes, that was amazing." He interpreted this to mean that Sally knew about Jill's infidelities and that Jill agreed that the sex was amazing. This hurt and embittered Jake even more. Jake, still reeling from the knowledge that his wife had cheated on him with his worst enemies, became more distant and decided to move out of the house into a studio apartment near his office. It was torn in half. He missed both his son, little Jake, and his wife, Jill, but he couldn't reconcile the betrayal he felt with his love for Jill. He threw himself into his work. He avoided seeing Jill, even if it meant he wouldn't see his son. I didn't go home for the weekend. I slept in the Marriott suites and spent the rest of my time in my office. I didn't have any other place I'd rather go. Plus, the empty building kept me from having to interact with anyone. In my own way, I began to accept the situation. I was able to keep my anger under control and approach the problem more methodically. Late on Sunday evening, my office phone rang. I used this day to sort out old matters. There were tasks that I put off for several months. Without thinking, I answered the call. "Are you there?" Jill answered my hello briefly. "Yes, I'm here," I sighed. I wasn't depressed, but for the first time I was calm. Jill hesitated. Finally, she said, "Jake, I'll meet you in the lobby of your building in 20 minutes. Please meet me there, okay?" "For what?" I asked. "Please, meet me there. Please just be there," she seemed to beg, and then hung up. I went into the bathroom to make sure my hair was combed so I didn't look too bad. I became quite careless about my appearance. I haven't shaved for 2 days. I needed a haircut. I've lost weight. I was sitting in the marble lobby of the county courthouse. On Sunday evening, it was just me and the security guard. We both jumped when we heard the door open and heels clicking on the marble. I saw Jill walking towards me. I turned to the guard. "Joe, I'll escort this visitor while she's in the building, okay?" "No problem, Mr. Martin," he replied. "She's a public defender like you. She looks like a lawyer." "Yes, she's a lawyer, but she's not a public defender. She works for a big law firm." I met Jill halfway through the lobby and escorted her to the elevator. She looked tired and scared. She was wearing jeans and a heavy winter coat. Her hands were stuffed into the deep pockets of her coat. We were silent as the slow elevator creaked to my floor. Once in my office, Jill finally unbuttoned her coat and plopped down with a sigh into the old chair across from my battered green metal desk. I looked at her expectantly. Finally, she spoke. "You'll be glad to know," she said, "that I found my engagement ring and my wedding ring." Jill took her left hand out of her pocket and raised it to show the rings. I was surprised and puzzled. Does this mean she finally looked at our wedding album and found them? I wasn't sure because if she did, she would have found the Miami boarding pass that I left with them. Her behavior was not what I thought it would be if she realized I was in Miami for homecoming. "Where did you find them?" I asked, pretending to be happy. "Sally kept them all the time. I gave them to her for safekeeping when I was on the excursion boat," she explained. I knew she was lying to me again. First, I knew that she was not on a tour boat with her classmates, but on Juan and Hector's yacht, the Seductress, and she didn't give the ring to Sally. She left them in the yacht's cabin. "Now, how about you put on your wedding ring, come home to little Jake and me, make love to me, and we can move on as a family." I nodded as if agreeing with her and reached under the unbuttoned collar of my shirt and pulled out my wedding ring, which was still on the leather cord. At first, I let Jill know that I was going to take it off the cord and put it on my finger. But then I stopped and asked, "Can I look at your rings, please?" Jill was hesitant at first, but then held out her hand so I could take a closer look at the rings. "It's fake," I announced. Jill quickly pulled her hand away. "What are you talking about, Jake?" she objected. "They're not fakes, but rather duplicates. Why did Sally send you duplicate rings? They must have cost her thousands of dollars." I continued, "Is the wedding ring engraved with our initials and wedding date?" Jill tried not to look guilty and quickly removed her hand. She continued to protest. "Of course they are mine. Why shouldn't they be?" "I don't know, Jill. I just know that these are not your original engagement and wedding rings. Why is Sally trying to mislead you?" Then I became more specific. "Or are you trying to mislead me, and why?" Jill held back a sob and replied, "How can you say such things? How can you say that? I just want you back. I don't understand why you're so upset just because I lost the rings." Jill still didn't understand the connection between my anger and her cheating with Juan. She believed that I could not learn of her activities from Friday evening until her return to Boston on Sunday afternoon. Therefore, my change in mood could not be related to her actions. During the month that I was away from home, I had time to think about the situation, less influenced by anger. I knew I was still deeply hurt. I felt a loss of self-esteem knowing that my wife wanted to have sex with someone other than me. I felt ashamed knowing that some people at least knew I was a cuckold. I realized that I had completely lost trust in Jill, not only because of her night with Juan, but also because she continued to lie to me. I knew I missed my son. He and Jill were the center of my universe. Losing one didn't mean I had to lose the other. I also knew that I did not want to be a victim of this event. Finally, I realized that I could not afford to live separately forever. I studied Jill for a few seconds and then said, "I'm going to go home. I miss my son." I didn't mention that I missed Jill, although I did. "However," I continued, "I will sleep in the guest room for now." This decision seemed to partially reassure Jill. Perhaps she thought that this meant the beginning of a normalization of relations between us as a couple, husband and wife. "I'll be home Monday night," I said. "See you then." As if wanting to let her go, I said that I needed to get back to work. Jill realized that I had ended our conversation and stood up to leave. "I'm glad you'll be home with us where you belong." However, she mistakenly believed that we could hug and kiss after this decision. She came towards me and I stepped back. "You haven't touched me since I came back from the meeting," she remarked with 2 tears in her eyes. She then turned and left my office. I felt that Jill's mind refused to connect my anger with her infidelity. Perhaps it was some kind of defensive reaction or denial. Perhaps it was simply a form of deception. I actually returned home on Monday evening. I moved most of my things into the guest room. When I had to use the master bedroom to access my closet and bathroom, Jill was kind enough to give me the space. I spent most of my free time with my son, little Jake. Together with him, Jill and I were one for his benefit. Jill and I were verbally affectionate to each other, even when we weren't touching. When Jake wasn't around, or after he was put to bed, I was indifferent to Jill and often withdrawn and silent, although I was no longer in a bad mood or making innuendos as I had been when my anger was boiling over. 3 weeks have passed since our meeting in the office. I was home for my son, but that's all. As far as Jill was concerned, I was home in body, but not in spirit. I slept in the guest room. I devoted most of my time at home to my son. I've always known what a wonderful boy he is, but over the past few weeks, I've come to appreciate him even more. Jill and I reached a peace agreement of sorts. We really worked together to do the logistics of the job. She stayed away when I went into the master bedroom to grab clothes or shower in the adjoining bathroom. I cleaned and kept her office clean so she could work there on her part-time schedule during the day. We survived. Well, I survived. Jill looked like she had lost several pounds, and her spirit seemed to have faded. On the other hand, I enjoyed the time spent with my son. One day Jill said in a monotone voice, "Sally called yesterday." "Good old Sally," I replied with some anger in my voice. "Did you tell her to go to hell?" "No, Jake. Why should I? She wants me to visit her in Atlanta." "It's probably better than her visiting you here in Boston, since I really don't want to see her," I replied. "She wants me to visit her, Jake, not us." I almost said something sarcastic about Sally getting Jill into trouble again, but I changed my mind and said nothing. "I want to see her." This time I could not remain silent. "Want to talk about old times in Miami?" I said sarcastically. I pushed her away more and more, but I couldn't resist. The pain of her betrayal became acute again. "I'm sure homecoming will come up, but I'd like to talk to her about us, Jake. She's my best friend, but I won't say anything if you don't want me to." I was surprised that she asked. "Of course, speak up if you think it will help." "I doubt it will," I continued. "I don't think you know Sally as well as you think you do." Over the next week or more, we worked together in a tense truce to make our lives bearable and to keep Jake's life as normal as possible. I knew what I had to do and formulated the steps I had to take to regain my self-respect and honor. I knew I loved Jill with all my heart, but I also knew I couldn't live with a woman who cheated on me. About a month after my high school reunion, I was in the kitchen washing dishes after dinner. It became our habit. Jill would cook dinner, and I would put away the dishes. I was wiping my wine glass when I heard a plaintive cry from the living room. I stopped and walked into the living room to see Jill sitting on the couch with our wedding album in her lap. When she saw me, she raised her hand with the wedding rings and my boarding pass. "You knew," she said with tears in her eyes. "You knew all along," she cried. She was clearly really upset. She cried non-stop. Seeing me, she covered her face with her hands. "I can't look at you," she said. "Don't look at me," she continued. I sat down in the chair opposite her and said, "Yes, I know everything. I was there. I saw everything." "I pushed it out of my memory," she said, sobbing and choking with sobs. "I pretended it didn't happen. I wanted it to go away." "Perhaps it has disappeared for you," I said. "But not for me. I see it over and over again. I even have photographs." "Photos?" she exclaimed. "Do you have photographs?" "Yes, I took photos of everything that happened. They're on my iPhone." "No, no, no," Jill cried. "I have to see them," she said. "Are you sure?" I asked. "They're frank. Besides, you know what happened." Jill replied, "I need to know what you know." I took my phone out of my pocket, opened the photo file, and went to the folder with the night shots at the high school reunion. "They start here," I said, handing her the phone. Jill picked up her iPhone and started looking through photos. The pictures showed the entire period from the moment Mendoza's yacht docked at the pier until she invited Juan to her bungalow. She looked at all the photographs. Some of them were blurry and indistinct, but nevertheless proved that I was there and saw everything that happened. Jill threw the phone on the couch next to her and cried even harder. I'm so sorry, Jake. I would do anything to change what happened, everything, she said, still crying. But you can't, right? I said almost indifferently. You practically destroyed me, didn't you? You had sex with the two men I hated most in the world. It took Jill a few seconds to understand what I said. What do you mean, two men? She said, still crying. Did you know that you had sex with both Juan and Hector that night? I said almost indifferently. What are you talking about? Jill answered, still crying. Let me tell you what happened that night, Jill, I said, and began to retell the events from my point of view. I watched from afar when you returned from your cruise on the Mendoza yacht. I was surprised that you were topless, and even more surprised that Juan hugged you without your objection. Immediately, I began to wonder how far you would go if you thought that I'm not around. So I decided to see what you would do without me. I watched you at the luau as you danced an erotic dance with Juan. I saw you let Juan fondle your breasts in the jacuzzi later in the evening, and I saw Juan walk you to the door of your bungalow late at night. What surprised, disappointed, and hurt me the most was that I saw you invite Juan to your bungalow. It killed my soul. When I saw this, I became furious. I went to your bungalow with hatred for both of you in my heart. As I approached your room, I picked up a large stone. My goal was to break into your room and break Juan's head. Don't think that I just wanted to hit him. I didn't want to just knock him out. And then it occurred to me that I wanted to kill you too, if Juan killed me first. But at that moment, I didn't care. I came within 10 feet of your door and stopped. For some reason, I thought about little Jake. I assessed my options and the scenarios that could follow. What if I burst into your room and found you so eager to have sex with Juan that you told me to leave and that we could talk about it later? That would cause an explosive reaction that I don't want to think about. What if Juan was so intent on having sex with you that he beat me up and threw me out of your room? In that case, my self-respect would demand the ultimate revenge on one or both of you. What if Juan had apologized as soon as he saw me? I would have ended up with a wife who would have cheated on me if I hadn't shown up at the last second. What would you have done then? Cry? Beg for forgiveness? Promise me that it would never happen again? Either way, I would end up with a wife I could never trust again. I would have been a loser either way. What if I broke into your room and killed Juan like I wanted? Little Jake would grow up without a father who was known as a killer. If Juan had killed me, the possible outcome would have been that little Jake would have grown up with his mother and stepfather Juan. That was not an acceptable option. If I had killed both Juan and you, little Jake would have been raised by one of his grandparents. That wasn't an option either. My only option at that moment was to leave and then deal with the consequences, no matter what they were. Jill finally looked at me and said, "What are you going to do?" I looked at her and with tears in my eyes said, "I want a divorce." Jill screamed loudly, "No, no, no, I didn't want this to happen. You were never supposed to find out." I replied, "I have no choice. You slept with my worst enemies and then lied about it repeatedly. You never thought to admit to cheating so that we could somehow work it out between ourselves. You lied and lied. I'm not for you anymore. I trust. You didn't respect me or our marriage vows." Jill alternated between sobbing and crying. "You can't forgive me and let us continue to live as before? You can't give me a chance?" she asked. I replied, barely holding back my tears. "I gave you a chance, and you continued to lie to me." I continued, "My sense of honor and self-respect will not allow me to move on as if nothing had happened. You would not respect me if I did. I would forever remain a cuckold to you, to myself, and to our friends, acquaintances, and colleagues. My pride will not allow this, despite the fact that I love you. And even though I love you, I don't want to touch you. I don't want to make love to you, knowing that the last man inside you was Juan or Hector. I don't want to kiss you." Although Jill listened as I expressed my thoughts, she only just realized that I was talking about Juan and Hector. "What are you talking about when you mention Juan and Hector?" she asked through tears. "You're an even bigger bitch than you think. Didn't you know that both Juan and Hector had bodies that night? I answered. I still don't understand what you're trying to say. I was with Juan and only Juan all night. How many times have you felt good? I asked directly. Please, Jake, I don't want to talk about it. I tried to push that night out of my mind. How many times did Juan feel good? I continued to ask questions that were as unpleasant to me as they were to her. Please, please, Jake, she begged. I didn't want you to know that anything happened at all, so I certainly don't want to go into detail about how many times or how long I had sex with Juan. In fact, I barely remember most of it. I drank too much, was too drunk and tired. Let me give you my version of what happened, I said. Juan walked you back to the bungalow a little after midnight. Judging by how eager you were to have sex, I think you and Juan were having it within a few minutes. After resting, Juan probably suggested you give him pleasure, which you undoubtedly did. Then you probably had sex again. Anyway, I continued, Juan probably fucked you one more time before you curled up with him and fell asleep around 3 a.m. Then, around 4 a.m., Juan seemed to turn on. He probably woke you up with light kisses, then continued to fondle your breasts. Either way, he turned you on to the point that you did it with him again, repeating what you did earlier. I looked at Jill. No wonder you thought it was a night of amazing sex. You were fucked at least 6 times, you were pleasured twice, and you also did Juan twice, if not more. How close am I to what actually happened? Jill was still sobbing as I recounted the supposed scenario in her room that night. You're closer than you think, she said. Some things are still unclear to me, especially the sex that happened on Saturday morning. I couldn't believe how resilient Juan was. He wanted me again and again. I'm so sorry, Jake. Looking back, the whole day seemed to be leading up to what happened. I just let myself go with the flow of events. I never, ever wanted you to know what happened. I hurt so badly you're hurt, and I can see it. You know I love you, and I know you love me and little Jake with all your heart. We have to get through this. We just have to. Let me tell you what really happened, Jill, I said, raising my hand to stop her pleas. After I decided that I wasn't going to break into your bungalow and kill Juan, and possibly you, I threw the stone. I felt like I needed time to calm down before I did anything, so I started walking along the beach. I walked for a long time. During this walk, I decided to return to Boston and not let you or anyone else know that I was there, that I saw what I saw. I wanted to return home on the first flight. I was walking back to my bungalow around 3 o'clock in the morning when I looked through the palm trees towards your room. There was a man standing at the door of your bungalow. At first I thought it was Juan who had taken a break. Then I saw the real Juan open the door of your bungalow and came out to greet his brother Hector. They stood together for a few minutes, then exchanged shirts. Hector entered your bungalow, dressed as Juan, and Juan went to his room. So the reason you had such an amazing night is because 2 men had you, Juan and Hector. No, 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 Jill cried. I didn't know. How could he? How could they? Technically, Hector had sex with you without you sleeping, I said. You didn't consent to have sex with him. However, I think that nuance is lost in the larger picture of events. Jill just cried and rocked back and forth, repeating, I didn't know, I didn't know. I don't care if you slept with Juan or with Juan and Hector. What matters to me is that you were unfaithful at all. You did it so easily, as if it was the norm when your husband is not around. Yes, you're right, Jill said. It was all too easy, and I didn't realize the consequences of my actions. I didn't even think about the consequences. What was I thinking? Where was my respect for my husband, for my marriage vows? If you want a divorce, Jake, I won't fight it. I'll do everything you said. We'll still have little Jake to remain a family. I've been thinking about this for a long time. You can agree with it or not. My main concern is little Jake, and I think yours too. The house is too big for one of us, and we both still have a lot of work to do. I think we should sell the house. We will each buy separate townhouses or apartments near our places of work and each other so that little Jake can continue to attend the same school and attend the same kindergarten since we both work. We will split it in half as much as possible. He will live with me for a month, then with you. To maintain the appearance of a family, we will spend holidays such as Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, and birthdays together as a family so that he does not feel it that one of his parents abandoned him. We will be polite and courteous to each other when we are together with little Jake and our families. Apart from this, we will live separate lives. Since maintaining two separate houses would be much more expensive, I have decided to leave the public defender's office and return to my old partner, Paul Evans, and his law firm. Paul has been wanting me back since I left for work in the city. He says he has more work than he can handle on his own, and he needs someone with my experience in court. Jill interrupted. But you loved being a public defender. I replied, yes, I did. I felt like I was helping people who are disadvantaged in the court system. I also gained a lot of experience in court on a wide range of issues. I leave the office in the capable hands of young, energetic lawyers who are eager to gain experience in litigation. I would like to focus on higher-level criminal justice. Paul promised me that I would have a lot of work and that the financial rewards would be significant. Jill cried most of the night. I couldn't help her and didn't try. I cried too. The next morning, Jill announced that she couldn't look me in the face for a few days and said she was going to Sally's for a few days. I also thought it was for the best. Not that I thought Sally would help her much. In fact, I really didn't like Sally because I thought she was the one who set Jill up. Jill still believed that Sally was her friend. I waited about an hour after Jill's plane landed in Atlanta before I texted her. I assumed that Sally had already picked her up and they were at her house. I wrote in the message that, in addition to the photos I took that night at the resort, I had a video clip of her dancing around the fire with Juan and attached the video file. I told her to pay attention to Sally's actions. The video showed Jill, Juan, Hector, and Maria trying to outdo each other with seductive moves while dancing in the light of a fire. In the background of the video, some of our classmates could be seen watching, and some even looked away from the moves, which could be considered R-rated. However, as Jill and Juan were dancing, Sally walked up to Jill and passed her a drink, whispering something in her ear. After Sally walked back to the crowd, Jill drank the drink in one gulp and threw the empty glass into the fire. The video then showed Jill dancing even more wildly and, at one point, tearing off her light blue sarong and throwing it into the air. The video showed the sarong flying across the sand towards the videographer. The video has ended. Less than 2 hours later, Jill called me and told me she was on the next flight home. I met Jill at the airport. She was silent for the first few minutes of the ride home. She then said, "I feel like I've been set up. I don't know why. I also know that it doesn't justify your behavior. I made all the decisions about what happened. I drank too much. I smoked weed. I allowed myself to be Juan's date for the weekend. And then I had sex with him. With them. I thought they were my friends, but they weren't. But I still don't understand why." "I don't know why either," I said. We were silent the rest of the way home. Divorce papers were filed. Before they were even finalized, Jill and I hired an attorney to come up with a fair division of the property. Our finances were separated, and we began to manage our money affairs separately. At the same time, we both found suitable places to live near our jobs and each other. Our house has appreciated significantly in value over the few years that we've lived in it. It was sold for a substantial profit, which we shared. I used part of the profit from the sale of the house as a down payment on a 3-bedroom townhouse. I invested the rest in liquid assets until I decide what I want to invest in long term. My new income level allowed me to put more of my salary into savings. As it turns out, I will soon need this. Jill bought a 3-bedroom apartment less than a mile from my townhouse. At some point, while we were discussing the logistics of sharing custody of little Jake, we came up with the idea of decorating each of the rooms in our separate homes in the same style as Jake's room in our previous home. We thought this would make his transition from Jill's house to mine and back more comfortable. The first month or so was traumatic as we moved our belongings from the family home to our new homes. At the same time, I was getting used to my new job as a criminal defense lawyer in a private law firm. Paul did not hesitate to burden me with cases as well as the responsibilities of an equal partner in our law firm, Evans and Martin, attorneys at law. I kept little Jake with me in our house for the first month, while Jill moved out of the house and into an apartment she found. Jill was kind enough to keep little Jake for a second month, while I moved into a 3-bedroom townhouse. I refused to let Jill tell me about the night she cheated. I did not accept and could not imagine that there could be any reasonable explanation or justification for her actions. I was still suffering. However, she still insisted that I listen to her side. On the day we signed the divorce papers, she insisted on doing so only if I allowed her 30 minutes to explain what had happened. I really didn't want to hear her side of the story. I didn't think there could be any justification for her side. However, after signing the documents, we dismissed the lawyers and were left alone in the conference room of the law firm. She started with an apology, again saying how sorry she was, that she knew she had hurt me badly and that I was still suffering. She was very sorry that she had caused the end of our marriage, but she understood that my pride was so wounded that I would never be able to get over it. She also understood that due to the events that led to the end of our marriage, I had lost a lot of self-respect due to something that was not my fault. She almost started crying, and I could see that she was having a hard time holding herself together. I reminded her that I had agreed to listen to her description of events, not her further apology for her role in the destruction of our marriage. She gathered her strength and began. Reunion weekend. It was so nice to get away. Did you know that this was the first time in 6 months that I was alone for longer than a trip to the store? I was on my own, without work, without my husband, without little Jake. Just me. On the way to Miami, I told myself that I wanted to join my single friends and have fun like we did at the end of the semester in law school. The resort was so beautiful. Warm tropical breezes, rum cocktails, hot salsa, beautiful people. Jake, it was just so sexy there, Jill cried. Jake, everyone was there, and we were having such a good time. It was like going back to my college days. Before little Jake came along, I felt like I was on my own again, not in charge of anything. For no one and for nothing but yourself. I've always let you be on your own, Jill. I've always given you space if you said you needed it, I replied. My voice was dull and emotionless. I know, Jake. It's not what you did, it's just life. I couldn't help myself. You wanted to get married, Jill. I thought as much as I did, and I know you wanted a child. This time Jill stopped me. Yes, I did. I wanted to get married and have a baby. I love you, Jake. Oh God, it's so hard. She continued, I was hoping to join my single friends from school, but I soon realized that there were none. Most of them were married, and those who were single did not come to the meeting. However, Sally was there. We teamed up, and she told me that she would make sure I had a great time. She told Juan that I was alone, and he promised to take care of both of us during the meeting. She always got along well with the Mendozas. On Friday afternoon, we all gathered on the patio for cocktail hour. There we met Juan, Hector, and Hector's wife, Maria, and planned the next day. The meeting included a sightseeing boat ride to a small island owned by the resort for a barbecue lunch. Juan and Hector said it would be much more fun to use their yacht. I was a little suspicious of Juan's intentions and told him I should probably stay with other friends. Juan said to invite some of them along. Sally wanted me to go, so I said I'd go if Steve and Meredith went. A little later I found Meredith, and she said that she and Steve would join us on Mendoza's yacht. The yacht seemed much nicer than a tour boat and certainly less crowded. Although I missed partying with my classmates, I enjoyed the freedom of the yacht. The dinner was great, and there was plenty of booze. I shouldn't have started drinking so early that day, and then Juan brought out the illegal substance, and we all smoked a little. I can't tell you how relaxed and free I felt. As you can guess, or as you saw, I went with the flow. not realizing that I was being led by people who pretended to be my friends. I drank more and smoked more weed, all of which reduced my resistance to proposals. I allowed myself to dance like gypsy with Juan by the fire. I let Juan touch me in the jacuzzi. It was all very seductive and sexually exciting. By the time Juan walked me to my room, I was so ready for sex that I actually dragged him inside. I wasn't thinking about you. I'm so sorry. I woke up the next morning alone in bed. I had the most terrible headache. The room smelled of sex. I was in pain. It began to dawn on me what I had done. What I had done to you, to us. I cried and cried. I vomited and started vomiting dryly. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, I called the hotel service and asked for clean sheets. Then I took a long shower and tried to wash myself. I felt clean. When the hotel service arrived with clean sheets, I made the bed again and curled up with the pillow. I couldn't sleep. I felt so ashamed and guilty that I kept crying. At about 1 p.m., Meredith came looking for me because she noticed I wasn't outside enjoying the meeting. At first, I didn't want to let her in, but she realized that something was wrong, and I finally opened the door. She hugged me, and I cried in her arms. She asked what happened, and I told her everything. How will I ever meet Jake? It will just kill him, I cried. Meredith took control. This never happened, Jill, she told me. I want you to start forgetting this now. This never happened. I can't fool Jake, I replied. Meredith responded, I'm serious. Jill, forget it happened. You don't have to feel or act guilty. Jake will never know. Meredith continued to lay out her plan, emphasizing that nothing had happened. There was no incident that needed to be covered up or covered up. She ordered coffee and food from her room. Physically, I started to feel better. Meredith told me that I should continue the rest of the weekend as normally as possible. This would mean that I would have to go to the banquet and dance in the evening, the last event of the homecoming. I told her I couldn't meet my classmates, and I definitely didn't want to see Juan. Remember, Jill, last night didn't happen. You will act as usual. No one but you and Juan knows what happened, and even Juan won't want Jake to know what he did to you. In the afternoon, Meredith asked me to go with her to the alumni lounge to hang out with the others a little. Several people asked where we had been that morning. Meredith told them we had been shopping. About an hour later, everyone started heading back to their rooms to change for the banquet. I followed Meredith's plan. I pushed the incident far into the back of my mind and focused on communicating with friends. One or two of them mentioned the dance that Juan and I did last night, but did not draw any conclusions about what happened next. Meredith picked me up from my room, and I went with her and Steve to a cocktail hour before the banquet. Meredith was like a protective angel, always there. I actually started to enjoy the evening partly because I was able to push the events of the previous one out of my mind. Night. This did not happen. I was sitting next to Meredith and Steve at the banquet. I saw Juan and Hector at another table with Maria, Bill, and Sally. Juan often looked in my direction, but I deliberately avoided eye contact with him. I was afraid that he would approach me or ask me to dance later in the evening. I told Meredith that if he talks to me or touches me, I won't stand it. Meredith told me not to worry. She personally told Juan to stay away from me, otherwise there will be problems. I spent the rest of the evening trying to enjoy being with my classmates. I only had one glass of wine the entire evening and danced once with Steve. Meredith and Steve made sure I got to my room that night. The next morning, I rode with them on the hotel bus to the airport and flew home. I had pushed the incident out of my mind enough to rid myself of any guilt I might have felt. I wanted everything to seem as normal as possible from now on, even to the point of not making you suspicious by too much. Guilty sex. I didn't seem to feel guilty. Jill finished abruptly, "This is what happened. I will never forgive myself for what I did. I don't think you can forgive me. I don't expect that. Just know that I will always be sorry for hurting you so badly, and know that I will always love you." At this point, Jill simply stood up and left the room. I waited the necessary time for the divorce to become final. It was an anticlimactic day when I received notification that I was a single person again. I continued to work hard. Paul was right about the benefit of my experience as a public defender. This was a definite advantage for our law firm. I not only knew the court system well, but also understood the internal mechanisms of the prosecutor's office. We moved from a deal-making philosophy to a jury trial philosophy, and we started winning. Our law firm's reputation gradually grew as we took on more important cases and more prominent clients. My usual after-work destination was the local lounge bar, where Paul and I would go to either relax or bring clients when we wanted a more informal setting than the legal setting of our office. On this particular day, it was only 2 p.m. and the lounge was almost empty. I sat down in a secluded booth and ordered a double shot of spiced rum. I started to think. I probably wouldn't have thought about anything extreme if it weren't for the email I received from Sally last night. Dear Jake, I understand that you are now divorced. I'm very sorry to hear this. On the other hand, it frees you up to meet other people. I am one of these other people. We dated for a short time before you met my roommate Jill. I was more beautiful then. In fact, I was very beautiful. I can't tell you how fascinated I was by you at that time. You were all I could think about. It hurt me more than you could imagine, watching you date and fall in love with my roommate. I never thought she was worthy of you. You didn't see her flaws. She was cunning. I knew you were wrong when you married her, and I always wanted to prove it to you. I did this at the reunion. I showed you that she is just an easily accessible woman. Even though she hadn't had much contact with Juan since they broke up when we were in law school, I knew she didn't dislike him like you did. It was easy to get Juan, Hector, Jill, and I together for the weekend. I knew that with a little help she would trap herself. Juan was at the height of his charm. He always wanted her, and he always hated you because he thought you stole Jill from him. Anyway, I'm sorry it turned out this way, but I wanted you to know that I'm here for you. Please come see me sometime. I will do anything to help you forget this bitch. I know I'm not as beautiful as Jill, but I could love you a lot more than she ever did. Sally. I assumed she was drunk when she wrote this letter. She wouldn't have admitted to setting Jill up if she was sober. I forwarded the email to Jill without comment. The letter confirmed that Jill had been set up by her good friend, Sally. It was also obvious that I had been set up too. It didn't justify what Jill did. Marriages must withstand temptation, and spouses must avoid situations in which they are vulnerable. Ever since the incident between my wife and the Mendoza brothers, I have felt humiliated and furious. Initially, I took out all my anger on Jill, whom I blamed for everything. The intensity of these feelings subsided somewhat after I initiated the divorce, but they did not go away. The pressures of my job as a trial lawyer distracted me from these feelings, but they still remained inside me. Since our separation and the start of our divorce, the anger and resentment have not diminished. I wanted revenge. No, I didn't just want revenge, I wanted revenge. Among our clients was Gerard Giardino, a wealthy real estate entrepreneur who focused exclusively on commercial real estate. He was arrested and charged with arson. He was credited with setting fire to several warehouses on the pier to prepare the land for the construction of a high-rise condominium. Warehouses were moderately insured. In reality, the police had little evidence. There were no remnants of incendiary devices, no traces of accelerants, no timers, nothing. Most of the evidence was circumstantial. It was well known that Giardino wanted to clear the land. The buildings were also insured, although not for a large amount. Mr. Giardino was out of town the night of the fire. He was at a meeting with respected businessmen in Baltimore. My gut feeling was that he was guilty. However, I was confident that with so little concrete evidence against him, I could easily secure his acquittal. I might even be able to get the charges dropped. I wanted to know more. I called my contact at the private detective agency our firm used, Drake Detective Agency. The lead detective was a friend, and we used his services when we needed to get the facts. I explained to him what I knew and what I suspected. Giardino had hired an arsonist, a good one, to start a fire in the warehouse. Giardino had numerous businesses to support his real estate activities. There were several real estate offices and a construction company. He owned several small office buildings. Plus, he had stakes in various other businesses. The Drake Detective Agency checked all of them. The assigned detective checked the backgrounds of all employees working for Giardino. There were about 70 of them, and they were all clean and above suspicion. However, the reason Paul and I used this particular detective service was because of their thoroughness. They even checked job applications from employees who Giardino had not hired and found one interesting person. His name was Henry Williams. He applied for a job as a night watchman. What made his job application stand out was that he was a retired firefighter. The detective asked me if I needed more information about Williams. I said yes. Within a few days, I had a current picture of the life of Henry Williams. Chief Williams has been retired for over 7 years. 5 years ago, his wife became very ill with a strange illness that effectively left her housebound. The disease progressed to such an extent that Mrs. Wayne Williams' sister came from Florida to live with them and help care for her. Although Williams' boss had a handsome pension, the cost of his wife's medical treatment was financially prohibitive. That's when he applied for a job as a night watchman at the Giardino warehouse. He was not formally hired. Detectives also told me that he paid most of his bills with money orders. In other words, he used cash that did not go through his bank account. Holding Mr. Burr's at Williams' job application in my hands made me feel anxious, and I didn't know why. His record of service was long and distinguished. He was full of honors and awards. He went from a simple firefighter in his early 20s to the chief of a large city fire station. He also served as a fire inspector and investigated arson cases. I felt like I was holding a file on the man who started the fire in the warehouse for Giardino. Instead of entering this latest information into our case files, I hid it completely. In fact, I hid the file and folded the job application for Williams' boss, putting it in my coat pocket. When I left the office, I told my secretary that I would be gone for the rest of the day. I drove to Williams' house. I watched the house for a few minutes and noted that it was a one-story, middle-class home in a good neighborhood. I knew from the report that the Williamses had lived there for over 25 years. Before approaching the door, I took off my coat and loosened my tie. I left my briefcase in the car. A minute after I rang the bell, a woman came to the door. I explained that I wanted to speak with Chief Williams about a personal matter. I assumed it was the sister of Chief Williams' wife. She didn't invite me in, but told me to wait and close the door. A few minutes later, Chief Williams appeared. He was a tall, thin man with deep wrinkles on his face and thinning gray hair. He looked very respectable, despite the fact that he was wearing Docker trousers and a pullover. I introduced myself and gave him my business card. He looked at the card and asked what I needed. I am Gerard Giardino's lawyer. I'm defending him in the arson case. What does this have to do with me? He answered. I felt uncomfortable standing on his porch, so I asked him to take a walk with me. The boss pointed to the park he often went to for exercise. You know Mr. Giardino, don't you, Chief Williams? The boss did not immediately answer. In fact, he did not answer my questions directly. I quickly realized that I would have to be very direct with him. When we reached the edge of the park, I stopped and let my shirt out of my pants. Boss, I want you to see that I am not wearing any recording devices, so whatever we say to each other will remain between us. The boss continued walking and asked again what I needed from him. Chief Williams, I said to him, I have good reason to believe that you were the arsonist who started the fire that destroyed Giardino's warehouses on the wharf. I can't prove it at the moment, but if I were to hand over the evidence I have to the police, I'm sure they could find out the truth. Still remaining unperturbed, the boss said, I'll ask you one last time, Mr. Martin, what do you need from me? Blackmail? Good luck with that. I got to the point of my visit. I want you to burn and sink the boat for me. Chief Williams was surprised. And why should I do this for you, Mr. Martin? Do you think you can blackmail me? No way, I objected. I want to hire you. I will pay you $50,000 to burn and sink a boat for me. It's a big boat located in a small marina outside of Miami. And why do you need me to sink this boat, Mr. Martin? I'll tell you everything exactly, Chief, because I want you to know how dedicated I am to this business. After I do this, you can do one of three things: reject my offer and go to the police and turn me in, simply forget that I made the offer and move on, or accept my offer. I'll tell you what, Mr. Martin, he said. I still have to go to Miami to check on my sister's house. Give me details of the boat you are interested in, and I will take a look at the situation. I'll be back in a week. Meet me here in the park. I walk here every day around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Do not call me, write to me, or contact me in any electronic form. Never write anything down. I'll be back here in the park next Wednesday. I gave the boss information about the temptress owned by Juan and Hector and their family, and told him where to find her. He didn't write anything down. Having received information about the target, he turned and walked back the way he had come. I followed him 5 minutes later, got into the car, and drove home. I had a hard time getting things done the next week. It was difficult to concentrate on the work, although I think my partner and I did a very good job developing the defense for our client, Mr. Giardino. In fact, the police had no evidence to suggest that the warehouse fire was anything other than an accident, even though Mr. Giardino benefited significantly from the incident. On Wednesday, I was sitting at a table in the park near Chief Williams' house. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he came to the park and sat on a bench close enough to talk, but far enough away that no one would think we were together. I can do what you ask, Chief Williams said calmly. Give me more details. I want the boat to be set on fire and sunk on the 17th of June at the mouth opposite the resort, which is about a quarter of a mile downstream from the marina. You realize I'll have to do this in the middle of the night, don't you? He said. Yes, that's exactly what I want. The chief continued. You also understand that this will not look like an accident. It will look intentional. That's exactly what I want it to look like, I replied. Insurance is less likely to pay compensation if the boat is sunk deliberately. Without wasting words, the boss added, I want 50% of the $50,000 in advance, plus $10,000 for expenses. I want cash. Use 20s and 50s. See you in a week, boss, same time. When the boss started to leave, he said, Meet me next time on the other side of the park, near the picnic area. Without further ado, he walked towards his house. I worked for months to raise a large amount of cash. I couldn't just withdraw $35,000 from my savings account without suspicion if I was ever investigated. Instead, I took a little at a time and gambled with it or pretended to gamble. I often went to the racetrack and made dozens of bets, $100 to $200 at a time. Surprisingly, sometimes I won, although most of the time I lost. I always kept my tickets, even if I lost. I also picked up tickets that other players had thrown away. Within a few months, I had accumulated enough tickets to total over $50,000. Although it was in my best interest, documented losses would support the story that I lost a lot of money gambling. The following Wednesday, I was in the park again. My boss and I said very little to each other. I simply handed him the grocery bag I had brought with me and left. The only arrangement we made was to meet one last time in the park on Wednesday after the boat was sunk so I could give him the rest of the payment. As the time for the next class reunion approached, I received an invitation in my email. I have always enjoyed these reunions in the past. This time I wanted to go, but I didn't want to show up there. Too many people knew what Hill did, and everyone knew we got divorced because of it. At a school event for Jake that both Jill and I attended, I told her I wasn't going to go. No wonder she said she wasn't going to either. When we responded that neither of us planned to attend, Steve called me personally to convince us to change our minds. I told him without further ado that neither of us wanted to go. Both he and Meredith were very disappointed. On the night of the reunion, I had a date. Not only did I need him badly, but I also wanted to establish an alibi for my whereabouts that evening. I've had dates before, but usually when it was Jill's turn to take care of little Jake. That evening, I asked her to look after little Jake. I took little Jake to Jill's apartment after getting dressed for the date. Jill noticed that I was dressed up and asked if I was dating someone. I told her that I go on dates sometimes, but I don't have anyone I'm exclusive with. She clearly didn't like knowing that I was leading another woman and that I would probably have sex that night, but she did fix my tie and said that I looked very attractive. I asked her if she was seeing anyone. She said she is not yet interested in social gatherings. For some reason, this made me feel both good and guilty. It's good that she doesn't see anyone, and it's my fault that I do. I tried to act normal and was glad that I had a date that would take my mind off what might be going on at the reunion. We had a really good time together, drinks, dinner, dancing, and then heading back to her house for the night. By the time we finished having sex, we were both tired and fast asleep. At 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang. He probably called 10 times before I woke up and answered. "Who's calling me at this hour?" I said, picking up the phone to the insistent call. "Jake, you'll never guess what's going on," said an overly excited Steve. Suddenly, I remembered my plans for the night and instantly woke up. Still, I tried to sound sleepy and uninterested. "Couldn't it wait until morning?" I said. I was fast asleep. "No, no, you have to see this, Jake," Steve shouted excitedly. "The yacht Mendoza is on fire at the mouth of the river. She lights up the whole sky. I will send you some photos and videos. You can't miss this, even if you're in Boston." Steve hung up, and a few minutes later, I got the video on my phone. It was spectacular. In the middle of the mouth, the boat was completely engulfed in flames. The entire deck from bow to stern was on fire. Steve was apparently standing on the beach in front of the resort along with dozens of other people. They all oohed and awed at the spectacle. Some were wearing only shorts, others only a robe. They were all awakened by the noise and fire, and they came to the beach to look. The clip lasted a full minute. My date woke up to see what I was watching. I showed it to her. She was just as fascinated as I was. After we watched the clip 2 or 3 times, she pulled me back onto the bed, and my attention to her satisfaction suddenly returned. I slept very well after that. My date might have thought it was because she was wearing me out, which she did, but I slept well knowing that Juan and Hector were now minus one multi-million-dollar yacht. My date cooked breakfast for me on Sunday morning. After that, we parted, promising to meet again. I was home by 11 a.m. and had just walked in the door when the phone rang again. As expected, it was Jill. "Jake, have you heard the news?" she asked. I told her that Steve called me early in the morning and sent me a video. "Meredith called me last night," Jill said. "She sent me photos. I was going to call you, but then I thought that maybe you weren't alone and I didn't want to bother you." "Who could do this?" she asked me. "I have no idea," I said, "but I imagine the Mendoza brothers have a lot of detractors, including me." I discovered that the incident had become national news. On Sunday, several channels talked about a fire on a yacht, and more. About an hour later, the first police vessel, a fast trawler, arrived on the scene. They couldn't do anything but watch, but they took a lot of close-up videos of the fire. Another hour later, the first fireboat appeared on the spot. As the fireboat, with its huge water cannons firing, approached the burning boat, 2 underwater explosions occurred within seconds of each other. The first explosion lifted the bow of the boat about 4 feet out of the water, and the second lifted the stern to the same height. The fireboat was forced to retreat to a safe distance. The yacht sank back into the water, but it soon became obvious that it was quickly sinking. 5 minutes later, the water rose to the gondolas. Then the deck went underwater. Finally, the entire boat disappeared below the surface of the water and was out of sight. In an email from Steve, I learned that the Mendoza brothers were standing on the beach with everyone else and watching the fire. Steve said he told Juan and Hector that it was their boat that was on fire. They immediately panicked and ran to the marina, where they saw that their boat was missing from the dock. They were horrified to realize that their multi-million-dollar yacht was sinking in the estuary. Somehow they found the killer boat in the marina and went to their ship. They came within a few feet as if they were about to go on board, but the flames on the deck prevented them from doing so. They circled the burning boat for an hour until a police harbor trawler ordered them to move away. They sat in their small boat and watched her until she sank under the water. The Mendoza family immediately filed a right of salvage claim and demanded that other parties move away from the wreck. They were notified by police and the Coast Guard that while they may be eligible for salvage, an investigation into the cause of the fire and the loss of the vessel would be conducted. A police boat was assigned to monitor the location of the wreck. That was all the news until Sunday evening. New information about the sunken ship appeared in the evening news. On Sunday afternoon, a crew member of a police trawler spotted a package floating in the water. They caught him in a net and pulled him on board. It contained 5 kilograms of white powder, triple wrapped in plastic. A few minutes later, another package surfaced, and then another and another. A quick test at the police laboratory confirmed that the white powder was a controlled substance. Another hour later, divers from the Coast Guard and the port police arrived at the scene. They reported that the yacht had 2 external compartments, accessible only from the outside of the hull below the waterline, that contained dozens of packages similar to those found floating on the water. An explosion on the bow pierced the forward compartment and allowed the packages to float to the surface. Soon after, an arrest warrant was issued for the owners of the yacht, namely the Mendoza family. It was too late to stop the escape of Juan and Hector's parents. Their father and mother took a charter flight to New Orleans, which landed instead at a small airport outside of Havana, Cuba. Juan and Hector, along with Maria, were arrested at a small airfield on the outskirts of Miami as they boarded a similar flight to New Orleans. When I heard this news, I said to myself, after all, God exists. The following Wednesday, I was in the park talking with Chief Williams. I thanked him for doing exactly what I paid him to do, as if he were a cabinet maker who had outdone himself on a shelf project. Even though I knew better than to know how he did it, I still asked him how he did it. He told me that the opposite side of the estuary was a regional park. He camped there this weekend. At midnight, when all was quiet, he moved his equipment to the water's edge. He was wearing a black wetsuit and had black paint on his face. Using snorkeling equipment and a battery-powered towing device, he swam across the river mouth to the marina. He surfaced just enough to use his air gun to shoot at the 2 floodlights illuminating the pier and waited. When no one came, he concluded that no one was watching the pier and there was no video surveillance of the boats. Then he approached the pier where the Temptress was moored. First, he took the blue sarong I gave him and tied it to the railing in front of the pier. He then climbed aboard the boat, removed a small battery-powered pump from his equipment, and set it on the deck. One hose went into the diesel fuel tank. The other end was split into 3 hoses. 2 of them were stretched on either side of the upper deck. The third hose was placed in the cockpit. Chief Williams untied the mooring lines at the bow and stern of the boat and threw them into the water. He quietly returned to the water and secured the stern rope to his underwater tug. The tug was not designed to tow such a heavy cargo as the Seductress, but slowly began to move out of the dock. When it was free, he moved to the bow and attached this line to the tug. Little by little and quietly the yacht sailed along the pier, now hidden from view by the numerous other boats moored in their berths. Finally, a large boat quietly emerged through the marina entrance and found itself in the open mouth. From there, the boat was towed downstream to the resort. It was already after 2 o'clock in the morning when Chief Williams again boarded the Seductress and dropped anchor. At this point, the depth of the channel in the middle of the mouth was about 35 feet. The deck and cabin were flooded with diesel fuel. He said he considered removing the electric pump and hoses, but decided not to because the fire would have appeared intentional. Back in the water, Chief Williams attached explosive devices to the hull, 1 at the bow and 1 at the stern. They weren't very big, but they were big enough to punch a hole in the structure. They were set to 2-hour timers. He thought this would be enough time for the observers to enjoy the fire before the boat was sunk. Chief Williams collected all his equipment and walked away from the yacht. Having surfaced, he lit a flare and threw it onto the deck of the Seductress. The deck immediately caught fire, and the fire quickly spread throughout the boat. He really wanted to stay and watch, but he needed to disappear underwater and avoid possible detection by the observers who would soon appear on the beach. The chief returned underwater to the place from where he entered the mouth of the river. He quickly took off his snorkeling gear and wetsuit, rolled everything up, and put it in the trunk of his sister's car. At this time, sleepy tourists were awakened by noise at the mouth of the river. He followed the group to the shore where they could see the boat on fire. People oohed and awed and took photos and videos as they watched the burning vessel. After the boat sank and the excitement died down, most people returned to their tents to sleep until sunrise. Before returning to his sister's house, the boss disposed of all his scuba gear in a place, and in such a way that it would never be found. I asked the boss about his plans. He said his terminally ill wife would live a few more weeks. After her death, he and his sister will take her ashes to Miami, where she will be buried in the same cemetery as her parents. He and his sister will likely be living together in her home for the foreseeable future. I admired the boss's devotion to his wife. He loved her for the rest of her life. I've been following the investigation into the loss of the temptress on the news. The only evidence the police could find, if it could be considered evidence, was a blue sarong tied to the railing on the front dock where the temptress was moored. However, it was believed that the boat was deliberately burned as part of a substance deal gone bad. The Mendoza twins fought desperately against the charges against them. They apparently had a lot of money and hired a very prestigious law firm to defend them. Unfortunately, they were caught red-handed. The prosecutor separated the twins and offered each a deal. He said that they would both go to jail either way, but whoever wanted to get the deal first would testify. In the end, they both agreed to the deal so quickly that they overlapped each other, giving away the entire operation in which they were involved. However, the investigation and their legal negotiations dragged on for several months before they were actually sent to trial. From the moment I decided that I wanted to sink the seductress, I felt guilty. I was a lawyer sworn to uphold the law, and I was a judicial officer with strict rules of ethical conduct. This feeling intensified the more I acted to make the flooding a reality. I became a criminal. When it became obvious that I had unknowingly exposed a major operation, my fears and guilt disappeared. In fact, I felt good, as if the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer the sullen, humorless, sullen person. I was as happy as a divorced father could be. Jill was probably the first to notice my happiness. I no longer looked at her with contempt and hostility. I don't know whether she connected my new attitude with the sinking of the temptress or not. She never asked, but obviously enjoyed the much friendlier atmosphere between us. We saw each other often, always in connection with the life and activities of little Jake. We tried to make his life as normal as possible. We were together on the 4th of July when we took him to the beach to watch the fireworks over the ocean. For holidays like Halloween, we did the same thing as last year. Jill stayed home and handed out candy to the kids while I followed little Jake and his friends around the neighborhood, watching them and taking pictures. It's time for Thanksgiving. This year, it was supposed to take place at Jill's parents'. Despite our divorce, her mom and dad tried their best to get me to come too. My parents, brother and sister, were also planning to come with their children, little Jake's cousins. Since their home was 2 hours away, Jill suggested they go together. I didn't really want to give the impression that we were back together, but going on a trip together was a logical decision. Initially, I was a little nervous about how I would be received, but no one said anything either way. In fact, most of our relatives still considered us a couple. The fact that Jill never took off her wedding rings after finding them contributed to this impression. I asked her shortly after the divorce was final why she didn't take them off. She said, "I wear them to scare off men who want to date me." I didn't believe her. I knew she still had feelings for me and hadn't completely let go. I think so do I. Although I no longer wore my wedding ring on a leather cord around my neck, it still sat prominently in the silver bowl on my dresser, where I kept my cufflinks, tie pins, and badges. It was obvious to both of our families that our hearts were not in divorce. They never knew the real reason. Officially, this was recorded as irreconcilable differences. I think they saw it as their mission to get us back together. We spent Christmas as a family, just the three of us. Jake stayed at Jill's apartment. I had dinner there on Christmas Eve and went home. While he was there, little Jake shook and rattled all the gifts under the tree, even those that weren't for him. I returned early on Christmas morning. Jill was already up and making coffee and egg liqueur, a tradition we had started. Jill and I sipped our morning drinks while little Jake opened his presents. Finally, little Jake took out the gift I had hidden far away under the tree and gave it to Jill. "Who is this for, Mommy?" he asked. Jill looked at the tag and said, "This is for me." After reading the rest of the tag, she said, "This is from Dad." Jill looked at me and her eyes seemed to moisten. "Thank you, Jake. I didn't expect anything from you. You shouldn't have." "Open it, Mommy," said little Jake. When she opened the gift, Jill saw a pale blue amethyst necklace with a bracelet and earrings. "Oh, Jake, this is wonderful," she said very slowly. Now a tear rolled down her cheek. "You shouldn't cry," I said. Jill didn't respond with words. Instead, she moved from the couch she was sitting on to the chair I was sitting in, put her arms around my neck, and rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you, Jake," she just whispered. Later, after breakfast, Jill washed the dishes and I dried. Suddenly, without looking at me, she asked, "Jake, are you happy?" I didn't know how to respond at first, but then it came out, "I was happier when I was married. Before." I didn't finish the sentence. Still not looking at me, she asked another unexpected question. "My law firm is throwing a big New Year's party on the 31st. I would like you to come with me as my gentleman." I didn't know what to say at first. This would be the first social event we would go to together that didn't involve our family. Finally, I spoke. "I would be honored to be your date. Thank you for inviting me." "I was so afraid that you would already have someone," she said. "I didn't really plan anything," I replied. "I probably would have just stayed home, drank too much, and watched the ball drop on TV. The New Year's party will be much more fun." It was a great party. Jill's law firm was very large and prestigious. They spent a lot of money on renting a large hotel room, food, an open bar, and a band. Jill looked really good. She was sexy, but not vulgar. She wore a navy blue sheath dress that was accented by her amethyst necklace and earrings. We were sitting at a table with her good friends and colleagues, some of whom I knew and who knew me. We danced together a lot and even became too comfortable with each other while slow dancing. From time to time, single lawyers would approach me and ask me to let them dance with Jill, knowing that she was divorced, even though she came with me, her ex-husband. Usually, before I could even respond, Jill would intervene and say that she was only dancing with me that evening. I told her that I don't mind if she dances fast with her friends. She explained that most of them were wolves that she fought off for months. Even her wedding rings didn't deter them from knowing she was divorced. She kept saying that if I hadn't agreed to be her date tonight, she wouldn't have gone to the party. At midnight, we were on the dance floor as the last seconds of the year ticked away. When the magic hour arrived, the balls flew up, horns blew, confetti and streamers flew around the room. Everyone started hugging and kissing. I didn't let Jill out of my arms. We held each other, looked into each other's eyes, and then kissed. It was not a timid kiss, but a long, deep, meaningful kiss, half of which was love and half of which was passion. Everyone must have noticed how into each other we were because they didn't try to break us apart to hug and kiss us while celebrating the new year. When we finally broke away from each other, we were a little embarrassed. People looked at us. Only then did we hug and kiss a few people and shake a few hands. We returned to our table and the band played "Oh How We Danced on the Night We Were Wed," and I danced with my fiancé. The next music was rock and roll and encouraged our friends to join in the fun and dance for the rest of the evening. During a break at our table, I noticed that I was wondering why Sally hadn't come. Jill told me that a while ago Sally mentioned that she was very close to the judge who decided many of her cases. Jill said she hired a private investigator to find out. He discovered that Sally had slept with not one, but several of the judges who regularly heard her cases, and the information was passed on to the district attorney. She ended her story with the words, "I wanted revenge too." While we were dancing, an attractive woman approached us and asked to dance with me. Jill kindly agreed. I recognized her as Elizabeth, a classmate whom I knew poorly and had not seen for a long time. She said, "Jake, the same thing happened to me with Juan Mendoza a few years ago. I was ashamed, but I still told my husband what happened. He was strong enough to forgive me, and not a day goes by without me reminding him that he made the right decision. We haven't been to a reunion since. Until now, we wanted to thank you." I had to pretend that I didn't understand anything. "Elizabeth, I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," she replied. She hugged me and returned to her desk. She kissed the man she sat with and whispered something in his ear. He turned to me, waved his hand, and nodded his head. Throughout the dance, several men patted me on the back, shook my hand, or bought me a drink and said, "Thank you." At one point, a woman came up behind me as I sat at our table, hugged me, and kissed me on the cheek. She returned to her husband without saying a word. Jill remarked, "You're very popular with the ladies today, Jake." "Maybe this is my new cologne," I said with a grin. As I was getting drinks at the bar, I approached Bill Allen. "Your firm represents Juan and Hector, right?" Bill confirmed this. He said, "They had a lot of money, and they received the personal attention of our senior partners." He continued that they were going to spend a long time in prison. Moreover, they will not be together. They have not been together since their arrest. Since they had given up a significant portion of their substance smuggling operation, including the names of the main operators, they would almost certainly be killed in any federal correctional facility. So they were separated and given new identities. They will spend time in separate state prisons, one in North Dakota and one in Ohio, with false convictions against them. I asked him if he ever sees them. Bill said he did some support work for the partners when they had documents the Mendoza brothers had to sign or something they had to make a decision on. I asked Bill to give them a message. He agreed. I gave him the message I wanted to give to Juan and Hector. "You fucked my wife, so I fucked your life. Revenge will not be complete unless those who hurt you know that you have not only evened the score, but completely destroyed them. My words should have given them a hint that I was the cause of their destruction, but not enough for them to prove anything. Moreover, the law was far from taking action against the arsonist of their boat. I didn't know it at the time, but Bill began dating Maria, Hector's now ex-wife. No matter how beautiful and seductive she was, what she wanted most was to find a man who would truly love her. All she really wanted was a husband and many children. Bill turned out to be that person. Before the evening was over, Steve announced that there would be a bridal brunch reception the next morning. Some of our classmates had early flights and were unable to attend the reception. Others changed their travel plans, and some lived locally and did not need to leave. At one point during the reception, Jill tapped the mimosa glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. She had something to say. "Thank you everyone for being here today. I would like to believe that you have forgiven me for my mistakes 2 years ago. I know Jake has forgiven me, but I also know he will never forget. For me, I will never forgive myself, and I will never forget. However, I want you all to know that I am incredibly happy today and will do anything to keep Jake incredibly happy for the rest of his life." I believed her. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.